Welcome to another episode of Vendan Show, a show from Washington, D.C. to discuss the history, heritage, culture, and politics of the people of South Asia from a Western perspective. I am Adan Vendan, your host today. In this episode, we are going to be discussing about what Mr. Rahul Gandhi, a member of Indian Parliament belonging to the opposition Indian National Congress Party, said during a speech from the floor of the House in response to the Indian President's annual address. His speech has a deeper story behind it. That story has the potential to drastically impact the economic and strategic interest of the international community, including that of the United States, in a significant way. In his speech, Mr. Rahul Gandhi said that there are two Indias. Yes, there are two Indias. One belongs to the super rich who compete in the Forbes list of rich and famous globally, and the other is the masses, many of whom live on less than $2 a day. But he also talked about two other Indias. The one that considers India as a union of Indian states that came together under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru to gain independence from the British colonial rule. And the other is the idea of a single homogenous society, which only exists in the minds of a few people. If you are not familiar with the background, let me briefly bring you up to speed. It will help you understand the grave threat facing America's strategic and economic interests in that region. A few people consider the entire landscape from the southern tip of the subcontinent to the Himalayas in the north, Pakistan in the west, and Burma to the east as one monolithic, uniformly homogeneous nation state, which they call the Bharat or Hindustan. Like Pakistan, Afghanistan, they call it Hindustan. These are the alternate names that they use to refer to the modern Union of Indian States. Wait a minute, what about India? Is India not a country? Well, India is a noun with which the traders and the explorers refer to an entire region to the east of Sindh River for several thousand years. But there was no kingdom or a country called India until the British colonial power created it in 1947 while dividing the land into two major countries. That India was created by putting together large areas with a diverse population, with hundreds of kingdoms speaking numerous languages. The British colonial power was also fully aware of the fact that the landmass that they were handing over to the newly created government of independent India was never a single nation state or a kingdom. They were all ruled by different kings, some small, some large. Even after an independent India was created in 1947, many kingdoms remained independent under the leadership of their own kings. They had the sovereign right to remain so. The fact was they were fully dependent on the British Army for their protection. So Mahatma Gandhi and his men in their wisdom called all that region that came together voluntarily under his leadership in 1947 to create a self-ruling mechanism as all India. Not one India, but many. Then later, Dr. Ambedkar, the author of the India's Constitution, defined that idea of many Indias as the Union of Indian States. That was 2 years later. Hence, a Union of Indian States was born. It was something like a union of European states. But this Union of India was several times more complex and diverse than the European Union, or for that matter, the African Union, which came much later into existence. One must understand that India is the name of a subcontinent rather than a country. like in the sense we use the word Europe or Africa. Would it not be foolish to assume Europe to be a single country? But the Hindu nationalist organizations, like the Hindu Mahasabha, roughly translated as the Grand Hindu Council, and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is translated as the National Voluntary Corps, commonly referred to as the RSS, believe that there was a nation called Bharat or Hindustan under a single all-powerful king more than 2,000 years ago. And they believe Bharat is the old name for what they see today as modern India. We have done another show about this idea of Bharat and what it means, everything about the country of Bharat and the kingdom of Bharat. You might want to watch it for more details. The idea of Bharat expressly assumes all different kingdoms and territories of the subcontinent to be one single entity under a king called Bharatan, because they argue that a nation is not just a geographical territory ruled by one king or the another, but rather it is a nation of people like the people of Israel or Germany are, as a nation of people. They argue that the people of Bharat were one people despite being divided into so many races ruled by so many different kings and kingdoms. By the way, King Bharatan's kingdom is believed to have been confined to a few thousand square kilometers around the river Ganges. His kingdom did not expand beyond that. Excuse me. It is like arguing that all of Europe, including Scandinavia, Poland, Germany, and Holland, should be called Hispania because Spanish kings ruled some parts of Europe at one time or the other. They also argue, though they may have been scattered across hundreds of kingdoms in the subcontinent, they are all one people bound by a common destiny and a culture. A good argument. But of course, you could make the same argument for the Europeans and the Africans too. Yet, that does not make Europe or Africa a single nation. In the minds of these Hindu Mahasabha, or the RSS members, there is indeed such a thing called a pan-India, or the mythical Bharat, which is a golden land of milk and honey for certain sections of the society. During years leading up to 1947, their dream was within their grasp, but Mahatma Gandhi stood on their way. Gandhi wanted a secular democratic union of Indian states under a federal structure instead of a monolithic nation state called Bharat in the hands of a few. Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS did not like it. They were willing to even kill Gandhi for creating a single nation state called Bharat as a homeland for the Hindus. Now, going by the writings of the founders of these Hindu nationalists, they desired a nation to the exclusion of the others, like Heinrich Himmler had opposed Germany to the exclusion of the Jews and the Gypsies. But Gandhi refused to ignore the vast diversity of South Asia. He refused to subscribe to that notion of an exclusivist Hindu nation state, even after the British Crown agreed to create a Pakistan for the Muslims. He asked, what about millions of Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, and Zoroastrians who made India their home? Gandhi understood a young nation called India cannot be an exclusive idea for one kind of people or the other. He cannot agree to a nation with a particular people speaking a particular language either. He understood that cultures, languages, food habits, and their religious faiths were vastly different from region to region within the subcontinent. So the Hindu nationalists assassinated Gandhi. But now the same people responsible for the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi have got themselves elected to the federal government, and they are weakening the federal framework, which, while imposing their religion and language across different regions. They call it, wait for it, They call it one nation, one faith, and one language. Very familiar from the history. This campaign by radical Hindu nationalism is creating anxieties among the people of different regions and religion, despite what the leaders claim when they meet officials in foreign countries. So a young parliamentarian, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, spoke from the floor of the House, saying that the Modi government is creating dichotomies of India. Yes, there are two Indias. One is the India of super rich, and the other is the India that makes less than $2 a day. The Modi government has managed to push over 230 million people into poverty in the last 7 years after assuming office, while hundreds of billions of dollars have been siphoned off to a handful of businessmen that support Hindu nationalism. News outlets don't talk about it because, you guessed it, more than 80% of the news media is owned by 2 or 3 businessmen taking money from Mr. Modi. Meanwhile, millions of young people graduating from colleges and universities have no prospects of finding a job and cannot wait to get out of the country at the first chance they get, no matter if it's a computer job in the US or grazing camels in South Arabian deserts. Sadly, the economy is in shambles, and there is nothing much left for many of them to stay in India. With the gross management of the economy on one side, and a radical religious rhetoric to brand non-Hindus as the other, India has reached a tipping point. The Genocide Watch says that India under Modi has reached stage 8 of 10 stages before a genocide happens. I'm worried because he was right on the money twice in the past 20 years. First in Rwanda, secondly in Bosnia. Now he says India is next. Meanwhile, Washington seems to be in denial for political or short-term economic interest. Officials in Washington got their heads under the sand. Officials are clueless about the long-term threat to America's national security interest. Because, as Mr. Rahul Gandhi said, if something is not done in time, we could lose the Union of India. The intellectuals and the writers are warning that India will break up should Hindu nationalism is allowed to push forward in India with the help of their friends in Washington and in London. Mr. Rahul Gandhi cautioned that he hears the rumblings already on the ground. Many states, like the southern state of Tamil Nadu, is already re-evaluating their decision that they made 75 years ago to join the Union of India, on the assumption that the union government will not interfere in the rights of governing of the states. Given the policies of Modi government and the acceptance of it by Western powers, it is only natural for many states, not just the state of Tamil Nadu, but many other states to re-evaluate their own position to remain in the union or not, a grave threat. If that comes to pass, there will not be just two Indias like Mr. Rahul Gandhi was talking about, or what Mr. Rahul Gandhi was concerned about, but there could be many more. And that, my friends, is neither good for the people of India nor for the interest of the international community, especially the American commercial and strategic interest in South Asia and across the Indian Ocean corridor.